I have the same concerns that Member Hobb has on the safety issue. I had people call me and they said that they were not making police reports over the telephone, so they said, well, we'll come down. They said, don't even do that. Now, I read in the paper where the mayor has stated crime is down 33%. Is that because we're not making the police reports that are there and we're not doing it? I mean, it's pretty obvious, you know, you can figure it out if you have less police reports, yeah, then crime is down in that regard. But that's a play on words. And I have as much concerns over the issue that happened this past weekend of fire stations not having EMS. And God bless the police officer that went above and beyond his call of duty and took this gentleman to the hospital to try and save his life. Now, chances are he violated some kind of work ethics that he shouldn't have done, but he was doing what anybody that had any compassion for another person. I have served under, I don't know how many years now, and I have never seen what we are observing now with the EMS and the fire stations being closed. I really am hard-pressed to figure out what in God's name is going on with this. I mean, we have all taken an oath here. We get the calls because the people say, we're city council, you're sworn to safety, health, and welfare of the citizens. But what I'm hearing here is games being played over a minute amount of money. And honest to God, there's a part of me that wonders, is this payback because the firefighters came out in the primary election and supported a Republican opponent? I have to wonder that. I don't know what's going on, but I've never seen this, and this is despicable. Unless I'm a nurse, I stopped at accidents. I know at that time, and that was what's supposed that this gentleman, God rest his soul, and Mr. Morris is still here, he has my deep sympathy. 43 years old is too young to die. And sure, maybe he made the wrong choice, but we've made a heck of a lot of wrong choices in having a fire station and an ambulance not available to get there. What if there would have been a gunfight? What if there would have been 4 bodies? What would we have done? I mean, I don't get it. Mayor, I think you owe us council people who get the phone calls an explanation of why we are losing money by shutting these stations down and putting the public safety at risk. It is not good enough. We're not serving the community. We're just, you know, people save people. But all we're doing is putting more and more people's lives in jeopardy from the police standpoint and definitely from the emergency standpoint. When I have a problem in the neighborhood, I'll probably take the people myself to the hospital, for God's sake, because time is of the essence. Now, maybe this gentleman could have lived, maybe he couldn't have, but he didn't even have a chance. Can you tell us what is happening? Because we're the ones that get the phone calls. And nobody probably called you about this again like they didn't call on the Martis issue. Maybe you ought to think twice on why that happens to be.
Thank you, Member Cirelli.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd like to remind you, because perhaps you forgot, during the campaign 4 years ago, one of the issues that we talked about was the fact that there was fire station closed on a rotating basis before this administration came into play. And that's when the city had $8 million more than we have in our budget today. You know, this is something that's been going on for quite some time, as there's people that call off, as there's funding issues, you know, deciding how many stations is the right number of stations, when to open, where they're open, how many firemen. Those are all decisions that have to be made on an ongoing basis. You know, the city has tens of thousands of less citizens today. That's tens of thousands of less people paying taxes to us. That pays for these services. The fact of the matter is, we just came through the worst recession that we've seen in our lifetime. Over the last 3 years, we've cut thousands, in fact millions of dollars, nearly 10 million in reference to the lost revenue that we had to deal with. And so we have to make tough decisions. We have to make tough decisions on what we do fund and what we can afford to fund and what we can't. And this council is a part of that. This budget goes through council. We determine how much money we put in each category. But there are issues that we have to deal with, and there's going to be accidents, and there's going to be disasters and things like this that happen, and none of us want to see this. This is not acceptable for anybody. And you can ridicule zero tolerance all you want, but tell me out there, those people who have crime in your house, whether it was a car broken into, whether it was a prostitute in your backyard, whether it was something more serious. Is any of that tolerable? Any of it?
No.
Exactly. So we need to do everything we can to continue to make this community safer within the budget that we have. I can't spend money that we don't have or that council doesn't appropriate. And so keep in mind, when you look at these numbers, we have a finite number of dollars that we can spend. And if I put it in fire, you're not going to have enough police. If I put it in police, you don't have enough fire. We have limited responsibilities in reference to how much money we can spend and still meet the statutory guidelines. So this administration makes the recommendations, and we put those proposals in front of council, and council approves them. And so the fact is, we're doing everything we can to live within the means that we have and still provide the safety as best we possibly can. And you know what? It's not good enough. It's never good enough when somebody dies. It's never good enough when your house gets broken into. It's never good enough when there's a fire that didn't get responded to quick enough.
Mr. President.
Member Cirelli.
Mayor, I heard Mr. Carcione say that the SAFER grant is in jeopardy. Can you speak to that and address that, sir?
Absolutely. That's not true. The SAFER grant is not in jeopardy. If we take no action, potentially it could be in jeopardy. There's a guideline that says that we have to backfill within 6 months. Right now, the deadline for us to backfill is July 12th. We have the ability to hire in the plans of hiring enough to backfill to keep those positions in place so we don't lose the grant, and this administration is not going to lose that grant.
Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, then we are in the process of having cadets lined up and people lined up to bring them on board quick as we can.
We are in negotiations we're in conversations with FEMA, which oversees the SAFER grant, to look for possible waivers. We're also looking to determine if we have the waiver, what our actions are. If we don't have the waiver, what our actions are. We're also evaluating from a financial standpoint exactly how many firemen and policemen that we can actually bring on board. I'd like to remind this council that as we had our financial meetings, we updated you in reference to the state of the city in reference to the current financial conditions as of 2011, which right now we believe we have funding to get through based on our current budget. We've fully funded the police department. That ordinance is in the books right now. But there's not a lot of extra dollars at this point unless revenues continue to rise. We also know that we're going to lose about $1.5 million in 2012 from the state government based on what's already proposed and waiting for them to finalize that. Until they vote on it, we don't know the exact number, but we have what's passed through the State House legislature right now, waiting for the Senate to finally approve it. We also know that we're looking at losing another $3 to $4 million in 2013. And if I bring on firemen and policemen today, knowing with the financial situation that I have in front of me that I'm going to have to lay them off in less than a year, I have to lay off 3 firemen to save the cost of 1 in reference to the savings you get from a layoff. Which means if I hire 4 guys today, I could potentially have to lay off 12 less than a year from now. That's not good management either. So we have to make sure that we're factoring in every variable that we have before we make a determination. I'd like to know when I hire somebody that he's going to be here or she's going to be here. But do we want to hire 4 today and then have to lay off 12 less than a year from now or a year from now because of the financial conditions that are staring us in the face? I'm not willing to make that decision because I don't want to be down 12 firemen next year. So we have to figure it out, and we're working on it.
Mr. President, the last finance meeting we had, Mayor, you mentioned the fact that revenues were going up, and then we've seen an ordinance come down where you were going to take management people back up to the level that they were. And also, there was one in there to add annexation, $425 a month, I believe it was, $5,100 a year. You're going to give raises to some people. They're in management. But by the same token, the safety of the community is going to be on the back burner.
Mr. President.
Mayor.
Yes, first of all, the stipend on the annexation is something that's been on the books for some time. That's just part of the ordinance because it's part of the pay structure that has been in place, that has not changed in reference to what's in the recommended ordinance. The issue in reference to the non-union and management personnel, these folks have had their pays frozen. These folks have been the first ones to take the health care increase. They're the first ones to take the furloughs, and they're the last ones to be addressed. As we've had the adjustment, the ability to adjust out of this recession as we're coming out of it, we have taken care of virtually every single employee in the city, except for this group, which was the first ones to be hit. And I might add that each one of these people we're talking about, they have some aspect of service or safety that deals with the city, including the police chief and the fire chief, which, by the way, make less than the captains. So they literally are making less money than the people that report to them. And so there are some things that we have to fix and address in reference to our entire structure that has been put on hold and frozen. And we can have this discussion in detail when we discuss this personnel ordinance at the next council meeting. But to say that some of our employees are less valuable than others, I think is a mistake. All of our employees are important. They all have different roles. And yes, we have to be fair and look at the entire city as we're addressing what resources we have.
Mr. President, I want to know why Mr. Carcione said that they had 20 calls that would have been $6,000 in revenue. Would that not have paid to have a station open there?
Director. We've discussed that issue. I did a letter to Council about that. My recommendation, as I talked today to the majority leader and Mr. Prager, the head of personnel council, is if there's to be further discussion on that, we should do that in executive session.